Hello, everyone. In this video, I will be recapping the chapter 1 of the manhwa called Mightiest Melee Magician. In the vast expanse of space, amidst the twinkling stars that painted the cosmic canvas, an unconscious boy drifted, unaware of his surroundings. Suddenly, a resounding message echoed through the emptiness, cutting through the silence of the void. It was a proclamation from the heavens, informing the boy that his status window had been unlocked due to the activation of an artifact player. Despite the celestial announcement, the boy remained in a state of deep slumber. After some time, the boy stirred, gradually opening his eyes to a world cloaked in darkness. Confusion clouded his mind as he struggled to make sense of his surroundings. The inky blackness that enveloped him gave the impression of being submerged deep underwater. As he attempted to collect his thoughts, another thunderous message reverberated in his ears, declaring him to be the reincarnation of Draka, the infamous destroyer of worlds. Initially startled and panicked by this revelation, the boy's mind raced with questions. Who was speaking to him? What did they mean by his identity as Draka? These thoughts echoed relentlessly within his mind as he grappled with the surreal nature of the situation. Fearing it might all be a dream, he hesitantly reached out, only to find the reality too tangible to dismiss. Amidst his bewildered state, a colossal avatar materialized before him, dwarfing him with its imposing presence. The boy gazed up at the towering figure, his heart pounding with a mixture of awe and trepidation. The avatar's glowing red eyes bore into him, sending shivers down his spine. Instinctively, he shielded his face with his arm, overwhelmed by a sense of vulnerability in the presence of such a formidable being. As the boy wrestled with his fear and uncertainty, the avatar uttered incomprehensible words, its voice a deep rumble that reverberated through the void. Straining to decipher the message, the boy found himself unable to grasp its meaning. To his growing astonishment, he noticed his own eyes gradually transforming from their natural blue hue to a vivid crimson red, a visual manifestation of the profound changes unfolding within him. Meanwhile, several hours prior to these extraordinary events, life bustled within the confines of Ignite Academy, an esteemed institution revered for its mastery of magic. Nestled amidst the majestic beauty of snow-capped mountains, the Academy stood as a beacon of knowledge and learning within the Empire. On this particular day, the Academy's training grounds buzzed with activity as students gathered to demonstrate their magical prowess. Among them stood Lewin Ardell, our protagonist, awaiting his turn to showcase his abilities under the watchful eye of his class professor. The combat magic professor, known as Heidel, was a distinguished figure with his brown hair, adorned with a mustache and beard, and his eyes behind glasses. When he called out Lewin's name, the young student acknowledged with a nod and stepped forward. Professor Heidel's instructions were straightforward. Cast a fireball and aim it precisely at the scarecrow placed on the training field. Excitement rippled through the gathered classmates and their professor, all eagerly anticipating Lewin's performance. However, as Lewin stood there, his gaze fixed on his right hand, there was an unmistakable air of melancholy surrounding him. While casting a fireball might seem like child's play to most students at Ignite Academy, for Lewin, who lacked the ability to wield magic, it felt like an insurmountable obstacle. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead, and he couldn't shake off the fear of being ridiculed or the frustration of his stagnation. He whispered to himself, his voice tinged with uncertainty, "Can I do it this time?" Lost in his own thoughts, Lewin was abruptly brought back to reality when Professor Heidel called his name once more, urging him to commence the test. With a deep breath, Lewin summoned a fireball above his hand, determined not to concede defeat before even making an attempt. He strengthened his resolve, hoping against hope that this time would be different. The fireball swelled in size as Lewin focused his gaze upon it, a silent vow echoing in his mind. "I have to succeed this time." As beads of perspiration trickled down Lewin's face, his eyes remained fixed upon the fiery orb hovering above his palm. With a trembling hand, he directed the fireball towards the scarecrow, feeling the fiery mana swirling around him, growing denser with each passing moment, ready to be unleashed at his command. The students observing Lewin's endeavor were entranced by the spectacle unfolding before their eyes. Murmurs of amazement rippled through the crowd as they marveled at the size of the fireball and speculated about the sheer magnitude of mana being channeled by Lewin. One student couldn't help but comment on the impressive display, while another expressed disbelief at the seemingly impossible feat achieved by a mere human. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation and wonder as everyone, including Professor Heidel, stood in silent awe of Lewin's extraordinary magic. Meanwhile, Lewin had managed to surpass all expectations, conjuring a fireball far surpassing the capabilities of a typical mage. With the fiery mana swirling around him in a mesmerizing dance, he assumed a stance, poised to unleash his spell with unwavering determination and a sense of newfound hope. Just then, a sense of dread washed over him as he noticed something amiss with the fireball he was conjuring. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead, and he clenched his teeth, fearing yet another failure. The weight of the fiery energy he was trying to control seemed to crush him under its pressure, but he summoned every ounce of willpower to maintain his grip. Despite his efforts, the overwhelming sensation became too much, and he couldn't hold back the urge to vomit. Witnessing his desperate struggle, the combat professor, Heidel, called out to Lewin with concern etched in his voice. Lewin wiped the sweat from his brow and, though visibly shaken, stubbornly clung to the mana swirling in his hand. He muttered an apology to his professor, admitting his inability to execute the magic attack. However, Professor Heidel's urgency grew as he sternly ordered Lewin to release the magic immediately, warning of dire consequences if he failed to do so promptly. Despite Lewin's efforts to comply, the fiery mana persisted in its stubborn refusal to be discharged. This wasn't the first time Lewin had encountered such an obstacle. Despite his perseverance and advancement to the graduating class over the years, mastering even the simplest spell like a fireball remained elusive. Professor Heidel's warning struck deep, echoing the harsh reality Lewin had long been forced to confront, that despite his best efforts, failure seemed inevitable. With a heavy heart and lowered gaze, Lewin felt the weight of his inadequacy bearing down on him. He could sense the disappointed glances of his classmates and the unspoken judgment hanging in the air. Clenching his fists in frustration, he knew he couldn't give up, despite the overwhelming odds stacked against him. As he trudged toward the student dormitory, the weight of his perceived failure hung heavily on his shoulders. The whispers and murmurs of his classmates followed him, each word a dagger to his already wounded pride. One student, his face twisted in disdain, questioned aloud how someone like Lewin, seemingly incapable of even the most basic magic, could have earned a place in the academy, let alone be considered the best in his class. Another nodded in agreement, suggesting that perhaps it was time for Lewin to concede defeat. Meanwhile, a student with dark hair and a cruel smirk took delight in ridiculing Lewin as the laughingstock of the academy, his words cutting deeper than any physical blow. Despite the hurtful words and the weight of his own self-doubt, Lewin knew deep down that he couldn't let their scorn define him. Lewin's complexion paled as the murmurs of gossip reached his ears, each word feeling like a jab to his already bruised pride. The weight of disdainful stares bore down on him, causing beads of sweat to trickle down his face, a physical manifestation of the discomfort and unease he felt. With a trembling hand, he wiped away the moisture, a futile attempt to erase the evidence of his inner turmoil. Born into a local noble house, Lewin had entered the academy as the valedictorian, a feat that should have been celebrated. However, his success only seemed to intensify the envy and bitterness of his peers, many of whom hailed from esteemed and influential families. Their resentment festered into hostility, directed squarely at Lewin. Over time, he had grown accustomed to their taunts and insults, but the relentless onslaught had begun to chip away at his confidence, threatening to erode the very foundation of his self-worth. The source of Lewin's anguish lay in a condition known as mana evocation disorder, a cruel curse that had plagued him for the past 6 years. Despite his valiant efforts to overcome it, the relentless grip of the disorder seemed to tighten with each passing day, casting a shadow of doubt over his future. As he navigated the corridors of the academy, the weight of uncertainty bore down on him, each step heavier than the last. Entering the grand central hall of the academy, Lewin found himself amidst a throng of students, their voices blending into an indistinct murmur of conversation. Amidst the chatter, a sharp voice pierced through the air, cutting through the haze of his thoughts. "Dunce head Lewin," it called out, the words dripping with mockery and disdain. Startled from his reverie, Lewin lifted his gaze to see a group of graduating students, their faces twisted into sneers of contempt. At the forefront stood a boy with yellow hair, his laughter ringing out like a bell. With a cruel smirk, he taunted Lewin, suggesting that he should simply pack his bags and leave, sparing himself further embarrassment. The insults came fast and furious, each word a dagger aimed at Lewin's already fragile pride. The yellow-haired boy went on to claim that Lewin's presence had tarnished the reputation of the graduating class, his words laced with venomous spite. Beside him stood a burly student with brown hair, his voice laced with mockery as he remarked on Lewin's lack of skill and resources. The implication was clear. In a world where power and privilege reigned supreme, Lewin had nothing to offer. Though the words cut deep, Lewin remained silent, his jaw clenched in a show of defiance against the onslaught of cruelty. Despite belonging to the less affluent and lesser-known Arden family, Lewin carried himself with dignity. When he first enrolled in the academy 6 years ago, many had never heard of the Arden name. Yet, Lewin paid no heed to the whispers and snickers that followed him. He simply walked past, focusing on his goals. However, the yellow-haired boy couldn't resist the urge to belittle Lewin's background. With a sneer, he mocked Lewin's family, ridiculing them for their supposed foolishness and lack of wealth. His words stung, suggesting that Lewin's worth was measured by his family's status. It was an affront Lewin couldn't ignore. Feeling the heat of humiliation rising within him, Lewin's composure cracked. His jaw clenched, and his eyes flashed with fury, reminiscent of a cornered beast ready to strike. Without a second thought, he turned on his heel and delivered a forceful blow to the insolent boy, Ben Folt. The impact was visceral, sending Ben reeling backward, blood spraying from his mouth as he crashed to the ground. Witnessing the sudden eruption of violence, the brown-haired boy recoiled in shock, his eyes widening in disbelief. Meanwhile, Lewin stood firm, his expression unyielding, veins pulsating with adrenaline-fueled rage. He confronted Ben, his voice dripping with contempt as he dared him to repeat his insults. Ben, nursing his injuries and seething with indignation, lashed out at Lewin, questioning his audacity. But Lewin remained undeterred, a smirk playing on his lips as he dismissed Ben's outburst with a wave of his hand. Instead, he turned his attention to the brown-haired boy, who was now brimming with fury and intent on revenge. In a desperate bid to strike back, the brown-haired boy lunged at Lewin, his fists clenched in rage. Yet, before he could land a blow, Lewin swiftly countered, delivering a precise strike to the boy's gut. The force of the blow was staggering, causing the boy to double over in agony, gasping for breath as he collapsed to the ground. As the brown-haired boy writhed in pain, Lewin stood over him, an aura of power and dominance radiating from his form. He watched with cold detachment as the boy spat blood and succumbed to unconsciousness, a testament to Lewin's unwavering resolve. Amidst the chaos, Ben's voice continued to ring out, hurling curses and insults at Lewin. But Lewin paid him little mind, his focus drawn to the imminent threat before him. With a steely gaze, he turned to face Ben, only to find him raising his arms, a crackling surge of lightning magic gathering in his hands, signaling the brewing storm of retaliation. Lewin stood frozen, his mind racing as he witnessed Ben, someone he had never imagined capable of wielding combat magic, summoning crackling lightning mana. The realization that Ben would risk expulsion from the academy with such reckless behavior puzzled him. The air buzzed with electricity as the lightning coalesced into a dense, ominous form resembling a cannon. Ben directed this lethal weapon toward Lewin, his words dripping with disdain for someone with mana evocation disorder like Lewin. With a derisive command to perish, Ben unleashed the cannon's destructive power. Frantically, Lewin attempted to evade the imminent attack, but the sheer force of the lightning pinned him in place, rendering him powerless. Just as the lightning cannon hurtled toward him, Professor Heidel, alerted by the commotion, sprinted onto the scene, urgently commanding them to cease their hostilities. But his intervention came too late. The lightning struck Lewin with a deafening crack, enveloping him in blinding flashes of energy. Lewin instinctively shielded his face from the searing brightness, cursing his ill-fated predicament as despair threatened to overwhelm him. In the aftermath of the onslaught, Lewin found himself engulfed in darkness, his senses disoriented. Gradually, he emerged from the void, his surroundings morphing into a surreal dreamscape adorned with celestial bodies. Amidst this cosmic expanse, a towering avatar draped in ebony hues radiated an ominous crimson glow. As Lewin attempted to make sense of his surreal surroundings, a disembodied voice echoed in his ears, accompanied by the sudden appearance of a virtual screen. The screen proclaimed him to be the incarnation of Draka, the harbinger of destruction, and announced the unlocking of his status window through possession of the artifact player. Sweat trickled down Lewin's brow as he gazed upon the enigmatic avatar before him, his mind awash with questions and uncertainty. That's all for today's episode. Did you enjoy watching this manhwa recap? Would you like me to continue recapping it? Feel free to leave a comment below with your thoughts and suggestions. Your feedback is always appreciated.